The wind dragged a low moan across the prairie, carrying dust, dry grass, and something heavier, something that stayed behind the eyes once you saw it. Luke Travers wiped his hands on his thighs, staring out past the corral toward the far hills. It was too quiet for a ranch this size, too still. Even the cattle seemed to hold their breath lately. But the stillness wasn't the land's fault. It lived inside him. Been that way since the winter his brother died and his fiancée left town the same week. Folks said it was the Lord's will or that things happen for a reason, but Luke couldn't make sense of any of it. He'd built this place with calloused hands and long nights. It was supposed to be filled with laughter, with the smell of supper on the stove and someone awake for on the porch. But all it held now was the sound of his own boots on wood, and that silence was louder than gunfire. He didn't speak of it, not to the hands who worked for him or the preacher who still tried to stop by with those dry, useless words. Luke was a man who kept things locked tight inside, but it wore him down like rain on stone. He rode the edges of his own land every morning, not to check the fences like he claimed, but to chase the feeling that maybe the world still had some kind of movement in it, something that didn't feel dead. The land stretched wide, open and golden under a pale sky. Dry scrub, sparse trees. A trail ran through the south end of his property where travelers sometimes passed, though fewer came through now. Word had spread of attacks on the road, wagons burned, bodies found. Some folks blamed outlaws, others blamed natives, but Luke had seen enough to know evil didn't wear one face. He was out near that southern trail when he saw the buzzards. Two of them, circling low and lazy over a thicket of mesquite. His stomach clenched, and he nudged his horse forward. He'd learned to trust the signs of the land. Death left its scent, and it wasn't always from animals. When he found them, the sun was hanging low, casting the wagon in a hot, amber glow. It was splintered at the wheel, the canvas torn. A fire had scorched part of the frame, but that wasn't what stopped Luke's breath. Three women, young, no more than their early 20s, were tied to the back. Their wrists rubbed raw, their hair tangled, faces streaked with dust and sunburn. One of them had passed out, slumped awkwardly to the side. The other two lifted their heads slowly when they heard his horse. Luke slid from the saddle, raising both hands so they could see he meant no harm. The women blinked at him, and he realized then they were Chinese, rare this far west, but not unheard of. He'd heard stories, miners bringing brides, rail workers forced to leave families behind. But three women, left like this in the middle of nowhere, that wasn't an accident. That was punishment. His mouth went dry, fury knotting in his chest. Not just at what had been done, but at the kind of men who'd walk away from something like this and sleep that night. He stepped closer, speaking gently. "I'm going to cut you loose." The one in the middle looked at him like she wasn't sure if he was real. Her lips cracked when she whispered, "Water." Luke pulled his canteen and tipped it to her lips, letting her take slow sips. Then he moved to cut the ropes. Their skin was rubbed raw, and they flinched at his touch, but none of them screamed. They'd already screamed themselves empty, he figured. Whatever had happened here had taken more than just their strength. It had taken trust. Once they were free, they didn't run. That struck him most. No frantic escape, no begging. Just quiet stares, hollow and wide. They sat in the dirt like they didn't believe they were really free. "I've got a place a few miles north," Luke said, unsure what else to offer. "You're welcome to come with me." They didn't answer, but when he helped the unconscious one into his saddle, the other two followed behind without a word. He didn't ask their names. Not yet. Some wounds needed silence to breathe. The ride back was slow. Luke kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting someone to be following. Men who'd done this didn't just vanish into the brush. And if they thought they had unfinished business, they might come back. By the time they reached his ranch, the sky had turned dusky blue. He led them into the small bunkhouse behind his main cabin. Clean, simple, with 2 bunks and space on the floor. Ain't much, but it's warm. Safe. Still, they said nothing. Luke stoked the stove, poured water in a basin, and left them there with clean cloths and a pot of beans warming. Then he stepped out, shutting the door behind him. Outside, the stars had started to come out, and the air smelled of pine and dirt. He leaned against the porch rail, arms folded. His chest felt tight again. Not the old grief this time, but something new. Something like responsibility. Like anger. Whoever left those girls like that hadn't just committed a crime. They'd ripped something sacred. And Luke knew in his bones he couldn't let it stand. Inside the bunkhouse, the women moved slowly. The one with the sharpest eyes, May, watched the door even as she helped her friend clean the dried blood from her lip. Her name had once meant beautiful, but she hadn't felt that in a long time. She didn't trust this man, no matter how soft his voice. But he hadn't touched them. He brought them here. That meant something. Still, May knew better than to believe in kindness. Not out here. Not after what they'd seen. The youngest, Lynn, was trembling still, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold the cup steady. It had been her first time away from San Francisco. She hadn't expected the wide sky to feel so empty. She thought maybe she'd die before ever seeing home again. Yun, the third woman, still hadn't spoken. Not since the wagon. Her silence frightened the others more than anything else. She'd been strong before, quick with a joke, with sharp eyes and sharper words. But now her gaze seemed far away, like her spirit had wandered off and hadn't found its way back. None of them slept much that night. Luke didn't either. In the morning, he brought coffee and stood awkwardly near the door as they took it. "I won't ask what happened," he said. "But if you need anything, I'm here." May looked at him. Her voice came out flat. "They paid men to take us west. For work." It was a lie. Luke nodded slowly. He didn't need to hear the rest. He'd seen that lie before. In brothels, in mining towns, in places where desperate women were treated worse than cattle. "They won't find you here," he said. "And if they try, I'll be ready." Something shifted in May's face. Not trust, not yet, but something else. Something that felt like the first crack in the wall. Luke spent the rest of the day mending fences with one eye always scanning the horizon. He didn't know what this was yet. A rescue, a burden, a mistake, but it didn't matter. He'd brought them here. They were his responsibility now. He'd lost too much already. He wasn't about to lose them too. The days passed slow, like the world itself was holding its breath. Luke didn't speak much, and neither did the women. But things shifted in small ways. Yun began sweeping the porch in the mornings. Lynn folded the blankets carefully when she thought no one was looking. May watched Luke with narrowed eyes, always trying to understand him, always on guard. She'd seen kindness used like bait before. She didn't trust it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Still, Luke kept to his word. He brought them food, firewood, water. He never pushed, never asked questions. But that didn't mean he wasn't watching too. He noticed the way Lynn flinched when a door slammed, or how Yun stared at nothing like she was listening for a sound that wouldn't come. He knew trauma when he saw it. This came in the form of broken sleep and a haunted silence that crept into the house when he was alone. Theirs was no different. It just wore a different face. By the end of the week, word reached the ranch that Sheriff Booker had returned from a trip east. Luke didn't much care for Booker. The man wore a badge like it gave him permission to settle grudges. Still, Luke saddled his horse and made the ride into town. He figured it was only a matter of time before someone came asking questions. 3 missing women were bound to be noticed, especially if someone had been paid to keep them hidden. Town was dusty, half-built, and always watching. Luke felt the eyes on his back when he tied his horse outside the saloon. Inside, the air smelled of whiskey and sweat. He found Booker near the back, playing poker with 2 ranchers and a man Luke didn't recognize. "Travers," Booker said, not looking up from his cards. "Heard you've been quiet lately." "I usually am," Luke replied. "Need to talk." Booker raised an eyebrow, tossed down his hand, and stood. They stepped outside into the alley, where the air was cooler and quieter. "I found something out by the southern trail. A wagon. Burned, and 3 women left tied behind it." Booker scratched his jaw. You find out who did it? Luke shook his head. They weren't talking. Still ain't. Booker narrowed his eyes. Chinese. Luke nodded once. The sheriff exhaled slowly. Could be a rail crew gone wrong. Could be smugglers. Or something worse. Don't matter who, Luke said. They're with me now. They're not going back to that. Booker studied him. Ain't your job to decide that. I didn't ask what my job was. Booker's mouth twitched. Not a smile, but close. You ever think maybe someone's looking for them? Someone who paid a lot of money. If someone comes, Luke said, his voice cold, they better not come to my land. They stood a long second in silence before Booker turned away. Keep your head down, Travers. Some things out here don't get fixed by good intentions. Luke left without answering. Back at the ranch, the women were waiting. Not outside, not openly. But May watched from the bunkhouse window when she heard the horse. And Yin sat near the stove with her hands folded like she was praying for something she didn't believe in anymore. That night, over stew and coffee, Luke finally asked, "Any of you know the name Callahan?" The silence was thick. Then Lynn's voice, barely above a whisper, "That's who bought us." May flinched. Yin looked down. Luke's jaw tightened. The Callahan brothers ran a freight company upstate, transported goods, people, secrets. Everyone knew they paid off the law. They were rich, cruel, and careful. You hear if they're still looking for you? May shook her head. They think we're dead. Luke nodded once. Good. Let's keep it that way. It should have ended there. Should have been enough. But the land had other plans. One morning, a rider came over the ridge. He was young, clean-cut, and far too polite for someone out here on business. Said his name was Harris. Said he was looking for stray property that might have gotten lost on the trail. Luke said he hadn't seen anything. Just livestock, sir, he added with a thin smile. We lose things sometimes. Wouldn't want a misunderstanding. Luke's eyes didn't blink. No misunderstandings here. You ride out the same way you came in. The man smiled, tipped his hat, and left. But Luke knew he'd be back. That night, May stayed behind after the others went to sleep. She stood near the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, eyes hard. That man works for Callahan. I figured, Luke said. He poured her coffee. You think he saw you? No, but he'll keep coming. Luke sat down. So, tell me, May, what do they want you for? She didn't sit, didn't blink. Not for marriage, not for labor. The silence that followed held more weight than words could. Luke nodded slowly. I'm not scared of them, May said. You should be, he replied. But I am too. May didn't say thank you. But something passed between them, an understanding. Luke didn't see her as broken. He saw her as someone who had survived. By mid-June, the ranch began to fill with extra hands. Old man Romer returned, a leathery ex-rider with bad knees, but sharp eyes. Luke told him the truth. We might have trouble soon. Romer didn't ask why. He looked at the bunkhouse, then at Luke, and nodded. Ain't the first time a man protected more than cattle. There was also Jace, young, impulsive, and with something to prove. He'd worked for the Callahans once, but quit after something went wrong. Luke didn't press. But when Jace caught sight of May one evening, he went pale. Where'd you find them? Wagon out by the trail. Jace swallowed. Callahan's got a temper. You keep him here, he'll come. I know. Jace stayed anyway. Not all tension came from outside. Inside the bunkhouse, something was shifting. Yet it started speaking again, but only to Lynn. At night, she cried in her sleep. And Lynn, sweet Lynn, who had never hurt anyone in her life, had begun hiding knives under her pillow. May noticed. She noticed everything. Lynn was changing, growing harder, quieter. There was a tightness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. And Yin was slipping into something deeper. She stared at the fire for hours, hands twitching like she was remembering something she couldn't say. May tried to hold it all together, but she wasn't sure how. She was the oldest. She had brought them west. This had been her idea, this new life. Now it felt like she had led them to slaughter. Luke began staying closer to the bunkhouse. Not inside, not hovering, but close enough that they knew he was there. He fixed the window hinges, replaced the broken step, Small things, but the kind that made a place feel safe. And slowly, they began to talk. Not about what happened, but about other things. May used to teach sewing in San Francisco. Yin used to sing in a tea house before the fires shut down. Lin had a brother once. He drowned when she was 10. She hadn't told that story in years. Luke listened. He never interrupted. He didn't tell them his own stories, but they didn't ask. They knew pain when they saw it. One afternoon, Luke found Yin sitting by the barn. She had a crow feather in her hand and was whispering something in Mandarin. He crouched beside her. "What's that mean?" She looked at him, slow and cautious. "It means even crows watch over their dead." He didn't know what to say, so he just sat with her until the wind picked up and the feather drifted away. That night, Romer came to the main house with news. Ryder came through the canyon. So there's a bounty out for 3 Chinese women. No names, just a reward. Luke didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "We dig a trench. Fortify the barn. Jace, take the west ridge tomorrow. Romer, get the old rifle from a cellar. We might not have long." The men nodded. In the bunkhouse, May watched Luke from the window. She saw the way he moved, the weight in his shoulders, the tired set of his jaw. They had come here broken, but now the world was circling again, and they weren't hiding anymore. May turned to Yoon and Lin and said, for the first time with certainty, "We fight if we have to." None of them disagreed. The clouds rolled in thick by the end of the week, like the sky itself knew something bad was coming. The land felt heavier, quieter, less wind, fewer birds. Luke walked the fence line before dawn, each morning checking tracks, watching the hills. Jay stood lookout on the west ridge with a spyglass he stole from the Callahans 3 years ago. Romer sat with his rifle like it was part of his body. Tension had settled into every beam of the ranch. Inside the bunkhouse, things were cracking. Lynn wasn't sleeping anymore. She lay stiff on her cot each night, eyes open, clutching the knife under her blanket. Her voice was flat when she spoke, and sometimes she didn't speak at all. Yin had taken to wandering, waking before anyone else, walking barefoot through the grass until her feet were raw. May tried to keep them steady, but something inside her was unraveling too. She didn't trust safety. Not anymore. Safety was what the Callahans had promised them before they were locked inside a wagon with no food and too many hands. And then someone poisoned the well. Luke found it early, smelled the bitter chemical edge in the water before he took a sip. Romer confirmed it with one glance. Creosote, or worse. Someone poured it in last night. Luke stared out across the field. They were here, watching us. Maybe still are. That same afternoon, someone cut the horses loose. Jace found them wandering a mile north, spooked and lathered with sweat. He didn't say anything to Luke, but when he walked past the bunkhouse, his eyes caught May's. They both knew what it meant. The Callahans were toying with them. Inside the main house, Luke finally broke the quiet. He sat across from May at the table, hands dirty from fence work, voice low. "They want us scared." "We are," she replied. "But we're not leaving." "No," she said. "We're not." That night, a letter arrived. No writer, just a note tied to the gate. Luke read it by lantern light. "Return our property, or we burn your land." No more warnings. May read over his shoulder. "They don't bluff." "I know," Luke said. The next morning, Yin disappeared. No one saw her leave. No note, no sound. The front door of the bunkhouse creaked once before dawn, and by the time the sun rose, she was gone. Panic hit fast. May ran across the fields barefoot, shouting her name. Lynn cried until her chest ached. Luke searched the northern hills, hoping, praying, but Yin was nowhere. Romer said what none of them wanted to say. She wanted to trade herself. No, May snapped. She wouldn't. But deep down she knew. Yin had grown quieter each day, eyes dimmer. She had felt like a burden, like the trouble followed her most. And now, maybe she thought leaving would end it. Luke saddled up. "I'm bringing her back." "I'm coming," May said. He didn't argue. They rode hard and fast through the dry hills and dusted canyons. following tracks that barely held shape in the wind. Jay stayed behind with Lynn, and Romer posted at the barn with rifles ready. 3 miles out, they found her. Yin was tied to a fence post outside an abandoned way station. Her wrists were red and swollen, lips cracked, but she was alive. And beside her was something Luke hadn't expected, a man. Mid-30s, coat too clean, teeth too white. Harris, the one who'd visited the ranch days ago, stood calm beside her like he wasn't even ashamed. "You shouldn't have come," he said, adjusting his cuffs. Luke didn't answer. May slid from her horse, trembling, barely holding herself back. "She came willingly," Harris said. "Said she didn't want more blood on your land." "Brave girl." "You drugged her," May said. Harris smirked. "That's slander." Luke dismounted. He didn't reach for his gun. "Let her go." "I could," Harris replied. "But my employers think she's worth something. Might not look like it now, but back east, there's a market for girls like her. Trained, quiet, exotic." May flinched like she'd been slapped. Luke took a step forward. "Last warning." Harris turned to Yin. "Tell him. You came on your own." Yin didn't say a word. But then she did something no one expected. She spit in Harris's face. That was enough. Luke moved fast. His fist connected with Harris's jaw, sending the man sprawling into the dirt. While he was down, May cut Yin loose with trembling hands. Yin fell in her arms, sobbing. They didn't kill Harris. Not yet. Luke took his revolver, tied him to the same post, and said flatly, "Tell Callahan if he sends anyone else, they won't come back." They rode home in silence. Yin held tightly in front of May's saddle, barely conscious. That night, Luke kept watch alone. The note, the poison well, the stolen horses, Yin, this wasn't over. It was only getting worse. The next morning, the twist came. Romer rode up to the porch, face pale. "You need to see this." Luke followed him to the east field. There, standing with calm, cruel confidence, was Daniel Callahan himself, the oldest brother. He wore a dark coat and a half-smile, surrounded by 5 riders with rifles. Luke's jaw tightened. "You're bold." Daniel dismounted. "You've made things complicated, Mr. Travers." These girls were headed somewhere important. Paid for. Contracts signed. "They're not property." Daniel tilted his head. "We disagree." May stepped forward. "You tortured us." He looked her over, then looked away like she didn't matter. "I don't talk business with women." Luke's hand hovered near his sidearm. "Get off my land." Daniel didn't flinch. "You really want to die for this?" "I'm already dead," Luke said. "So what do I care?" A long, cold silence followed. Then Daniel gave a slight nod to his men. "No guns today," he said. "But next time we burn everything." They left. Romer exhaled shakily. "We're running out of time." That evening, Jace walked out of the barn and didn't come back. At first, Luke thought he was scouting. But by midnight, he knew. Jace had betrayed them. Lynn found a coin pouch under his cot, still heavy with silver. Blood money. Payment for a distraction. Callahan hadn't come alone. He'd been checking defenses. Jace had shown them where the weak spots were. May was furious. Yun, heartbroken. Lynn just stared, numb. "We let him eat with us." Luke felt like a fool. The defenses were tightened. Romer set traps. Luke moved the women to the root cellar and buried extra ammunition beneath the floorboards of the bunkhouse. The days passed slower than before, the tension thick enough to choke on. The final blow came just before dawn 2 days later. Smoke. Luke shot out of bed, heart racing. The barn was on fire. Flames reached high into the sky, lighting the fields with flickering orange. Horses screamed from the corral. Lynn ran toward the blaze, but Luke caught her arm. "They want us scattered," he said. But it was too late. The fire was a distraction. Shots rang out across the ridge. Figures on horseback rode in from the north. They were under attack. Romer fired from the window of the bunkhouse. Luke returned fire from a porch. Yun, crouched in the cellar, held Lynn's hand tight as bullets tore through the siding. And then, something unexpected. May climbed the ladder from the cellar with a lantern in one hand and an old rifle in the other. She moved through the smoke like it wasn't even there. Calm, focused. She knelt beside Luke and said, "Give me cover." He blinked. "What are you?" "Just do it." He did. She ran for the barn's far side where the wind had shifted the flames. Within minutes, she'd lit a second fire. This one aimed at the Callahan riders' path of escape. Smoke poured over the hill, confusing their horses, sending them into a panic. Luke fired into the chaos. Romer hit one rider square in the chest. Another fell, screaming, into the brush. The rest turned tail, the flames forcing them back. By dawn, the barn was gone, but the women were alive. And the Callahans had lost. May stood in the ashes, smoke clinging to her clothes, face streaked with soot. Luke came to stand beside her. "That was reckless," he said. "I know, but it worked." "I know that too." He looked at her a long time. She looked back. "You're not just survivors," he said. "You're fighters." May didn't smile, but her eyes softened. "We were never just victims," she said. That was the twist. Luke had brought them in thinking they needed him. But the truth was, he needed them too. Not just for redemption, not for guilt, because they reminded him what it meant to keep living, even after everything, even after betrayal, even after loss. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Ashes still covered the yard by morning. Blackened beams jutted from the wreckage of the barn, casting long, crooked shadows in the weak dawn light. The fire had taken half the storage, most of the hay, and all but 2 horses. Smoke still clung to the air, making it hard to breathe and harder to think. But no one had died. Not yet. That alone felt like a miracle. And it came at a cost that wasn't done collecting. Luke hadn't slept. He stood in the same boots he'd worn through the night. Ash on his shirt, his eyes rimmed with red. He hadn't spoken much since the attack ended. Everyone thought he was thinking strategy, what to rebuild, how to reinforce when the Callahans might strike again. But that wasn't it. He was thinking about Jace, about how the kid had looked him in the eye, shared meals with him, stood watch on his land, then walked away and sold them out. Inside the main house, Lynn sat in silence at the kitchen table, cradling a cup of water with both hands like it might disappear. She hadn't spoken since the fire. Not to May, not even to Yun. She just sat, eyes vacant, shoulders slumped. Luke tried once, asked if she wanted to walk to sit in the sun, but she didn't even blink. May was the one who finally reached her. She knelt beside her younger friend, hand resting gently on her knee. "You're allowed to be angry," she whispered. "You don't have to hold it all in." Lynn didn't cry. Instead, she set down her cup, stood slowly, and said in a flat, shaky voice, "I want to help. Next time they come, I want to fight." Yun's hand flew to her mouth. She was still healing from the bruises Harris left, still coughing at night when the air got cold. But her heart was whole again because they'd come for her. She looked at Lynn like she wasn't sure whether to stop her or stand beside her. "You don't need to fight," Yin said gently. "We can find another way." But Lynn shook her head. "They treated us like animals. I want them to know I remember." Later that day, Luke found May behind the remains of the barn, hammering nails into a rough wooden structure. She was building something, he didn't know what, but the sound of hammer on wood was steady. So was her breathing. She had a calmness about her that scared him sometimes, like pain had forged her into steel. "You should rest," he said. "I'm done resting." She didn't look up, just kept working. And when she finally did glance at him, there was something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Distance. Luke stood quiet for a moment. Then he said, "After this is over, you should take Lynn and Yun and go. Find someplace better. This place was never meant to be safe." May stopped hammering. Her face didn't change, but her voice came out clipped. "You think we're your problem? That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Luke exhaled slowly. "I mean, I care about what happens to you. And I don't want you to get killed because of me. That's not your choice." She looked at him directly now. "You took us in. You made this our fight too." He nodded, but the knot in his chest didn't ease. He was a man who had already lost too much. His brother, his home, the idea that life was fair. The thought of losing them too made his hands shake in ways he didn't show. Especially May, because somewhere along the way, what he felt for her had changed. It wasn't just duty or guilt or gratitude. It was something quieter, deeper. Something that made him look for her face first when they came back from a ride. Something that made the silence between them feel full instead of empty. But now that silence had grown harder, he didn't know if she felt the same. And even if she did, what kind of life could he offer her here, with danger always pressing in? By the end of the week, tempers were fraying. Romer argued with Luke about sending for help. "I've got a cousin near Fort Benton," Romer said. "One word, and he'll send men. Armed ones." Luke shook his head. "That'll bring more trouble. Callahan's rich enough to buy a judge. If it looks like we're forming a posse, he'll come harder. So what do we do? Sit here and wait until we're lucky again?" Luke didn't answer. Later that night, Yin approached him in a barn shell. She looked small in the orange glow of the lantern, her hair still damp from washing. "I want to learn to shoot," she said. Luke blinked. "You sure?" She nodded once. He handed her a rifle and taught her where to place her hands, how to breathe, how to feel the trigger. And when she fired into the field, he didn't flinch. She missed the first 3 times, then hit a tree trunk on the 4th. She smiled for the first time in days. As the ranch hardened itself, so did the people. Lynn practiced knife throwing with a target painted on a plank. May buried supply caches in case they had to flee. Yin took to fixing saddles and oiling the guns without being asked. Even Romer stopped muttering and started sharpening his old Bowie knife again. But not everything held. One afternoon, May found Luke at the northern fence, hammering boards with his jaw tight. "You're pulling away," she said. He didn't stop working. "I'm trying to keep you alive." That's not the same as loving someone. The hammer stopped. Luke didn't look at her, but his voice dropped. "I don't know how to love someone who might leave. Or die." May stood beside him, close but not touching. "We've already died once. What's left is what we make." He looked at her then. The silence hung between them again, but this time it wasn't heavy, just unfinished. That night, Lynn found another note. This one was slipped under the bunkhouse door. "One more chance. Return them, or we take the girl first." The quiet one. The one who's already broken. Yin read it, didn't speak, then walked to the main house and handed it to Luke. "I'm not broken," she said. "I know," he replied, but the message rattled them. It was personal now. They were being watched again, too closely. Luke called a meeting by the fire pit. "We can't stay passive," he said. "We draw them in. Set traps. End this before they bring more men." Romer nodded. May said, "What's the bait?" Luke hesitated. Then me. "No," May snapped. "That's not the plan. It is now." They argued late into the night, but Luke was set. The next morning, he rode out alone, with a rifle strapped across his back and the note tucked inside his coat. He left a false trail, tracks that circled south, then doubled back to an overlook he knew Callahan's riders used. He waited. For hours. When they came, it was only 2 men, not the full group. Luke stood from his cover and fired once. Hit the first one square in the shoulder. The second man dropped to his knees, screaming, hands raised. "Don't shoot." Luke stalked down the slope, gun still raised. "You got one chance. Tell Callahan the next time he crosses my land, he leaves in pieces." The man nodded, trembling. Luke leaned in. "Or I come for him first." By the time he returned to the ranch, the others were waiting, guns ready, eyes wide. May ran to him without words, fists hitting his chest before she broke and wrapped her arms around him. "You don't get to die without warning me," she whispered. "I wasn't planning on dying. You're still a fool." "I know." That night, for the first time, May didn't return to the bunkhouse. She stayed in the main house, in Luke's room. They didn't speak much, just lay beside each other, as if the warmth itself might ward off fate. The external danger hadn't ended, but the stakes had changed. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about what kind of life they were willing to build, even while the wolves still circled. They weren't hiding now. They were daring the enemy to come, and they were ready. The wind carried a different sound that morning, quieter, heavier, the kind that stirred the trees but didn't cool the skin. Luke felt it in his chest before he heard the sound of hooves. A storm wasn't coming from the sky. It was riding toward them. From the porch, he spotted the dust cloud first. 4 riders. Not 5, not 10, just 4. But they weren't trying to hide this time. They wanted to be seen. And at the head of them rode Daniel Callahan himself. Luke called to Romer without turning his eyes from the ridge. "Get the girls in the root cellar." "No," came May's voice from behind. "We're not hiding again." Luke turned. Her hair was braided tight, her jaw set hard. She wore the same determination he'd seen the night of the fire, the same fire that refused to bow. "You don't need to prove anything." "Yes, I do," she said. "To myself." Yin stood beside her, holding the rifle Luke taught her to load. Lynn stood just behind them, her hand wrapped around the handle of the knife she never let go of now. They wouldn't run. Not this time. Luke nodded once. "Then we do it together." The Callahans dismounted at the edge of the field, calm as ever. Daniel didn't raise his voice, didn't draw his weapon. He walked forward like he owned the land beneath his feet. "I gave you every chance, Travers." Luke stepped down from the porch slowly. "You gave me threats, fire, and poison. And you stole women like they were horses." Daniel smiled without humor. "They were paid for. We had papers. There's no paper that makes what you did right. Tell that to the men in town who look the other way. Or the law you seem to think will save you." "No law's coming," Luke said. "And I don't need saving." Daniel's eyes flicked to May, who stood now just behind Luke's shoulder. "Is this what you wanted?" Daniel asked her. "To trade one kind of cage for another?" May didn't blink. "This time I chose it." Luke felt something shift then. A challenge in the air. A truth standing naked in the sun. Daniel stepped closer. "I'll leave you one last offer. Turn them over. We vanish. You keep your land. Your pride." Luke looked him dead in the eye. "No." Daniel's smile faded. And then a shot rang out. Not from Luke's side. Romer dropped to one knee with a shout. Hit in the arm, bleeding. A 5th man had circled from the back, hidden behind a ridge. An ambush. They'd come expecting a fight, after all. Luke didn't think, just moved. He pushed May behind him and fired once, then twice. The 5th man went down, but not before getting off another shot. It missed Luke by inches, chipping the porch beam. Then chaos exploded. Yin took cover behind the water trough, firing steady and low like he taught her. Lynn knelt behind the feed cart, eyes wide, but hand firm on the pistol May had given her. And May ran to Romer and dragged him back into the barn, her body low to the dirt, gunfire zipping over her head. Daniel ducked behind a wagon. He fired once, wild, and shouted, "Don't make me kill them all." "You already tried." Luke shouted back. And then the shot that stopped everything. May had taken Daniel's shoulder clean through. Not fatal, but hard and fast enough to drop him. His men saw it. One bolted. The other froze. Luke walked toward Daniel slowly, gun still raised. "Drop it." Daniel's hand hovered at his hip. "This isn't justice." "No," Luke said. "It's what's left when justice fails." May walked up beside Luke. Her voice was calm. "Let me talk." Luke didn't stop her. She stepped forward, eyes locked on Daniel. "We were real people. Before you took us. Real names. Real families. You turned us into things. But now we get to decide who we are." Daniel coughed, blood staining his sleeve. "You think anyone cares? You think this changes anything?" "It changes everything," she said. Daniel laughed, low and bitter. "You kill me, another takes my place." Luke said, "Maybe, but not here." And then May did something none of them expected. She stepped back. She looked at Luke and said, "He should live." Luke stared at her. "After everything?" "Yes. Let him live with it. Let the world see his face. Let him explain the scars." Daniel's face twisted with something close to panic. "You don't get to disappear in a legend," May said. "You get to live with the fact that 3 women you tried to destroy beat you." Romer, bleeding but conscious, muttered, "She's tougher than all of us." By evening, Daniel Callahan and the two surviving men were tied to their own wagon and sent east toward a sheriff not on his payroll. Thanks to Romer's cousin, who had indeed arrived with 3 deputies just in time to escort the prisoners. Luke gave them letters, written in his own hand, detailing every crime he'd seen. May signed one, Yin another. Lynn, with shaking fingers, added her name too. The ranch was quiet again by nightfall. But peace was different now. Not fragile. Earned. Luke sat on the porch with May beside him. She held her knees to her chest, face calm. "I thought I wanted him dead," she said softly. "But that would have made him part of my story, forever. This way, I walk away." "You didn't just walk," Luke said. "You stood. You fought." She looked at him. "So did you." And then she leaned her head against his shoulder. The sky above them was purple and silver, stars flickering to life. Yin sat nearby, plucking strings on a broken banjo she'd found and half repaired. Lynn, for the first time, was laughing, quietly, with Romer, who was telling a story about his younger days and claiming he once outran a bear. The land still bore the wounds. Ash still lined the field. A scar on the barn's foundation remained. But they were alive, and more than that, free. Later that night, in the quiet dark of the house, Luke sat at the table alone, hands folded. May entered without knocking. "I think I'm staying," she said. He looked up. "I was going to leave after all this, but I'm not going anywhere. Neither are Lynn or Yin." He nodded. "Good. And I'm not scared of loving you," she added. Luke blinked. "Even if we lose it all again," she whispered, "I want to love something honest while I still can." Luke stood and crossed the room. When he kissed her, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, steady, like everything they'd lived through had been leading to that moment of calm between them. Outside, the wind was different. Still heavy, still full of echoes. But now it carried something else too. Hope. The summer air felt warmer now, not just in temperature, but in weight. Everything seemed a little fuller, brighter in the mornings, slower in the evenings. The world hadn't changed, not really. Cruelty still lived out there beyond the hills. But on that patch of land, where ashes mixed with soil and scars ran deep in the wood, something had shifted. The weight of survival had grown lighter. For the first time in a long time, there was room to feel. The barn would take months to rebuild. Lynn said she didn't mind the work. In fact, she wanted to help lay every beam by hand. Luke taught her how to hold the saw steady, how to measure twice, how to trust that something new could rise from the bones of something burned. Her quiet steadiness unnerved him at first. It wasn't childish anymore, not hesitant. Lynn had crossed some invisible line during that last fight and never looked back. She moved like someone who had chosen to stay awake in her own story. There was no more hiding. Yin had begun to smile more, small, careful smiles, as if each one tested whether the world was safe enough to receive them. She tended the chickens with a gentle discipline and sang again, under her breath at first, in a language the rest didn't understand but grew to love hearing. Luke noticed how Yin stood closer to people now, how she touched Lynn's arm when she passed, how she leaned into May when they sat near the fire at night. She was mending, not all at once, but enough to show she'd survived on more than willpower. Enough to show she still believed in beauty. In May had become the heart of the land. She didn't ask for permission to lead. She just did. Whether it was drawing plans for the barn, managing the food stores, or walking beside Romer with quiet questions and deep respect, she moved like someone who had nothing to prove and everything to offer. Luke found himself watching her when he didn't mean to, when she was cutting wood, or laughing with Lynn, or standing at the top of the ridge at dusk like she was talking to the past and daring it to follow her home. Their relationship didn't turn into a fairy tale. There were hard mornings. Sometimes Luke would drift into silence that May couldn't pull him from. Sometimes May would stand alone by the water trough, staring into the hills like she expected old ghosts to ride back over the ridge. But they didn't avoid those moments. They shared them, endured them. He'd reach for her hand. She'd press her forehead to his shoulder. No words needed. The sheriff never came. Booker had probably been paid off again, or just turned away from the trouble like always. But the deputies Romer's cousin left behind stayed for 2 weeks, checking in, making sure the Callahans didn't circle back. They never did. The family was scattered. Daniel stood trial for human trafficking and assault in a small courthouse far from the towns he used to control. His name didn't scare people anymore. It disgusted them. Lynn read about it in the newspaper weeks later. She held the page for a long time before she said, "They believe us now." And May, standing beside her, said softly, "We don't need them to. We believed each other." It was Yin who suggested they build a new room on the main house. One just for them, not out of necessity, but as a sign that this place wasn't a stop on the road. It was home. Luke didn't argue. He and Romer helped draft the foundation, and over several weeks, they raised the walls. When it was done, Lynn painted a single word above the doorway in Mandarin. Luke didn't know what it meant at first. Oh, May told him. One afternoon, as the sun fell behind a ridge, Luke rode out with May. Just the two of them. The hills were quiet, wind soft. They stopped near the old, burned-out wagon trail, where it all started. Luke hadn't brought her here since the first time, since the day he found them broken and bound. May dismounted slowly. Her face didn't show fear, only memory. "I didn't think we'd ever see this place again," she said. Luke didn't speak. He let her take it in. She stepped closer to the spot where the old wagon had burned. The earth had grown over now, grass returning, wildflowers pushing up through the ash. The land had healed faster than the people. But it had healed. "I used to think this was the end," May said. "That nothing past this mattered. But I was wrong." She turned to Luke. It was a beginning. He nodded once. "For me, too." They stood there a long time, side by side, saying nothing else, letting the wind carry the silence away. Back at the ranch, life slowed into a rhythm. Meals were cooked without tension. Laughter returned, not forced, but easy. May taught Yun and Lin how to use the old sewing machine Luke had kept in storage. Romer built a porch swing and claimed it as his command center. Even the neighbors, those who had once turned their eyes away, began to come around, offering wood, horses, sometimes just quiet apologies masked in polite conversation. It wasn't a perfect world. Lin still woke with nightmares. Luke still carried the weight of the ones he couldn't save. May still had days when she couldn't speak at all, but they were no longer trapped in pain. They were living with it. That was the difference. One evening, after supper, Luke stepped outside and found May standing barefoot in the dirt, her dress hem brushing the dry earth. She was staring up at the stars, arms crossed. He stepped beside her. "You still think about leaving?" he asked. "Sometimes," she said honestly, "but only because I know now I don't have to." Luke watched her for a long moment. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not because I need someone, because I need you." May smiled just a little. "Then I guess I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." That night, the four of them sat outside under the stars. Luke, May, Lin, and Yun. No stories, no plans. Just the sound of night animals and wind in the grass. Romer was already asleep inside. There was no talk of past pain, no fear of the Callahans, no weight of what if. Just peace. Later, Yin whispered, "We're still here." May reached for her hand. "Yes, we are." And that was the ending they never thought they'd earn. Not glory, not revenge, just the right to breathe without fear, to speak without flinching, to love without permission, to stay and live.